The period of proto-globalization represents a time of suffering, stratification, and most importantly resource extraction for the continent of South America. With the Portuguese colonization of Brazil and Uruguay and the Spanish colonization of Peru and Paraguay, many institutions deemed integral for civilization began taking shape. Political, religious, and economic institutions are chiefly funded, with social welfare accounted for last, and minor military presence maintained during times of conquering and to quell unrest. Well-established political institutions in South America in the era prior to colonization were sparse, to say the least, with the Inca Empire centered around Cusco and present-day Peru being the most powerful. The political makeup of the Incan Empire was anything but primitive. The empire was ruled by the Sapa Inca, with an advisor for life sitting below him on the political hierarchy. The power of the Incan aristocracy was distributed much in the way power is distributed between states in our current political system. Each district received nobles based on population, allotting for 16 nobles who made up the Council of the Realm. Thanks to the Incans' elaborate system of roads and scouts, they most likely caught word of the fall of the Tenochtitlan in 1521 and resisted Spanish conquistadors' inquiries to their lands and cities. Alas, resistance was futile for the Incans, and their capital of Cusco fell in 1533 to Francisco Pizarro and 168 of his troops accompanied by lesser tribes. The political developments that followed were far more intricate, although not necessarily more efficient or better in terms of governing. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Spanish and Portuguese divided South America in half, with Portugal gaining the eastern part and Spain gaining the western part. The Portuguese established a royal government in Brazil after a more divided hereditary strategy failed. The government was led by a governor, who later became known as a viceroy, who answered directly to the crown. As the colonies grew, the Portuguese created separate states in South America with separate viceroys. Similarly to the Portuguese, the Spanish established the Viceroyalty of Peru, centered around Lima, and eventually created two more as the colonies expanded. Both before and after the colonization of South America, agriculture was the primary economic occupation for the continent's inhabitants. The Inca Empire's economy was largely based on the growth of such staples as quinoa, potatoes, and maize, while in Portuguese Brazil, sugar was introduced as a primary cash crop. Since Europe's growing addiction to sugar provided ample demand, the plantation system was brought to South America to increase production. Plantations, however, required a large, cheap labor force, for which slaves from Western Africa were often imported. Indigenous labor was important as well. For example, the Spanish encomienda system organized local natives under Spanish colonists for agricultural labor, especially in Argentina, where cattle herding was pervasive. In addition to the agriculture, exportation of minerals to Europe, primarily gold and silver, drove the South American economy, especially after the gold rush in Brazil, resulting from gold found in Minas Gerais. About 20% of South Americans worked as miners, with most of the rest working in agriculture. Prior to Spanish and Portuguese arrival in South America, the Incas practiced a highly complicated religion which included a pantheon of gods. The Incan religion also permeates the political structure and institutions of the empire, most notably in the form of the Sapa Inca. Spanish Catholic missionaries followed conquistadors, bringing their religion to the native population and forcing many natives to convert. Catholic missionaries did represent the most sympathetic of the conquerors, as most friars and priests were concerned with the social justice and fair treatment of indigenous people. The beginning of this period also represents a turning point in Iberian culture, as Isabella declared conversion to Christianity compulsory within Castile and expelled some 200,000 Jews from Spain. This had a major impact on South America, as Jewish and Muslim merchants alike missed out on opportunities in trade and colonization early on in South America's fruition. (1492 to 1570) marks an age of conquest of South America by Portuguese and Spanish alike, with Tenochtitlan falling in 1521, Cusco falling in 1533, and by 1570, 192 Spanish and Portuguese cities existed in South America. Following the fall of the Inca, no major opposition existed to check the Spanish and Portuguese ambition of building a large-scale resource extraction economy. Small uprisings and local unrest kept the small military occupations on their toes, but no major government opposition will arise until the 19th century. One of the largest impacts of the newly established contact between the New and Old Worlds was the Great Dying in the Americas. The Great Dying was a massive death in the New World due to illnesses brought from the Old World to which the inhabitants of the Americas had no immunity. Historians estimate 90% of indigenous populations in the hardest hit areas perished due to European and African diseases. This is almost 3 times the amount of people who died in Europe due to the Black Death, which was roughly 1/3 of the population of Europe. The massive loss meant that labor was short, which led to the social consequences of forced and imported labor. Spanish rule in the Viceroyalty of Peru was anything but equal or beneficial for indigenous peoples. The Spanish administration in South America adopted the system the Incans used to construct their roads and buildings called the Mayda. The Incan Mayda was a type of indentured servitude where the servants had to spend a predetermined amount of days working for the government, living solely on subsistence wages. The Spanish changed this system to accommodate for massive amounts of silver found in Peru. They did this by extending the period of indentured servitude to a year and relying on 1/7 of the male population each year to mine the silver. Such a massive number of miners were killed while working for the Spanish that parents would often maim their children to protect them from the mines. The Spanish and Portuguese colonization of South America left a profound impact on the world, with Spanish and Chinese economic woes shaped by Spanish introduction of massive amounts of silver into the world economy.